Guest says a severe contagion risk seems low. Joining us right now is Jeff Hart, senior research analyst at Piper Sandler. When you look at what we're seeing in the past 24 hours, and this is a too big to fail story to some degree, but if you believe the government's coming to the rescue, maybe it's not. I mean, or maybe it's not a concern, at least.
Yeah, look, I'm based in Chicago, so it's hard for me to sit here and tell you I have an inside line on what's happening in mainland China. But there's a handful of things I can cite that should set U.S. bank investors at ease that this is not going to be potentially a really big issue or contagion. One, this is not a surprise, right? And that's a good thing. Two, severe contagion risk seems pretty low to me. Evergrande's just simply not that big, even relative to Lehman Brothers. So there's going to be some local economic issues in China, but it does not strike me as really, at this point, being a global issue. Third, as we're hearing now, Beijing clearly has the means to step in and make sure this is orderly if they decide to. So, I mean, I think they're likely to. Maybe not bail out the company, but at least keep the markets orderly if they see any kind of suspicion that this is turning into an economic or kind of financial system issue.
Jeff, but
importantly for U.S. banks, though, their direct exposures look pretty low, and it really shouldn't be a problem. And you can look at Citigroup, the most international of the U.S. banks. They came out last night and said, we have no direct exposure to Evergrande. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like this is really going to be that big of an issue for kind of the U.S. banks. And I kind of look at the sell-off we had Monday with U.S. banks in the market
Jeff,
in general.
But you're looking at it, and I don't want to be a pessimist, but you're looking at it, I don't want to say narrowly, but narrowly at Evergrande. I think the question that I would ask right now is whether we think there are other developers on the scale and size of Evergrande, possibly even bigger and more of them, that could default. What happens then, where that exposure is, and by the way, if they are defaulting, what that says about the Chinese economy goes back to the conversation that Joe and Becky and I were having at the beginning of the hour about what happens if the Chinese economy writ large starts to falter. That's not to suggest that a crisis is imminent, but it does portend some problems, you would think, both because of exposures on one side and also because, as Becky said, if China gets a cold, we're going to catch it.
Well, I mean, to your point, is there a bigger property company in China than Evergrande to default? I mean, if they're not the biggest, they're certainly one of the biggest. There probably has to be some knock-on events, but I think you could take some comfort in, look at the capital markets. Your other large property companies are still able to access the capital markets. Liquidity is available. I mean, things are still working unless you are viewed as being kind of fundamentally unsound or if you happen to be Evercore. So at least the capital markets are telling us they think kind of the rest of the sector there will be okay. And it's just tough to turn this into a Lehman Brothers event. I mean, Lehman Brothers had twice the liabilities of Evergrande, and it wasn't their liabilities that got the world in trouble. It was them as a counterparty, kind of at a G-SIB in the middle of all the financial transactions. It's not really where Evergrande sits. So, yeah, could it turn into something big? But I think the important message would be China clearly has the means to step in and kind of keep the economy and kind of keep things floating. So, I mean, when one of the largest economies in the world potentially has a slowdown, that's clearly not good news. But it's if we start talking about a recession or a dramatic slowdown, China can step in. And I don't really see how that reaches across the borders to the U.S. It just does not seem like a Lehman event to me.